I had never thought a simple walk in the woods would turn my world upside down. It was supposed to be a quiet afternoon, just me clearing my head and escaping the daily chaos for a little while. My life was stable, predictable even. I had a nice home, a good job, and a wonderful husband named Mark. But that afternoon changed everything, starting with the footsteps behind me. The crisp autumn air brushed against my cheeks as I strolled through the woods near our town. There was a trail I knew well, the one that twisted around tall pines and led to a small, hidden lake. It was a peaceful spot, secluded, almost magical, and it always seemed like my secret little escape from the rest of the world. I'd been visiting it for years, and never once had I run into another soul. Until that day. At first, the sound was faint, like leaves rustling underfoot, or maybe a bird flapping its wings. But then the footsteps became steady, deliberate. I stopped and turned around, but no one was there. I felt a bit silly, laughing it off as my overactive imagination. Yet, as I resumed walking, the sound came again, a rhythmic crunching of leaves that matched my own steps. Could it be Mark? Maybe he followed me here to surprise me, I thought. But no, Mark was busy at work. Then I thought of the stories I'd heard, the ones about people going missing in the woods, or the strange sightings people claimed. I shook the thought away, telling myself that this was just paranoia. But just as I turned a bend in the trail, I saw someone. He was leaning against a tree, looking like he'd been waiting. The man was tall, well-built, and his presence seemed to fill the space around him. His clothes were casual but neat. A simple shirt, jeans, and boots, all covered in a light dusting of leaves. The strangest part was that I didn't feel afraid, even though I should have been. There was something familiar about him. "Jessica?" he asked with a soft smile. Hearing my name sent a shiver down my spine, but it wasn't entirely from fear. His voice was gentle, warm, as if we were old friends meeting again. For a second, I thought maybe I was dreaming. But then I realized this was William. William and I went way back. We'd met in college, where he was the charming, funny guy who seemed to make everyone feel seen and appreciated. We'd lost touch over the years, life pulling us in different directions, but I'd never really forgotten him. Seeing him here, in the middle of nowhere, felt surreal. It also made my heart beat a little faster. "William?" I asked, my voice a mix of surprise and disbelief. "What are you doing here?" He chuckled, a sound that was both comforting and unsettling. "I could ask you the same thing. I moved back to town a few months ago. I didn't expect to run into anyone I knew here, let alone you." We fell into an easy conversation, as if no time had passed. We talked about our lives, our careers, and he told me about his recent return. Apparently, he'd taken a job at a nearby university as a professor, bringing him back to his roots. And then, something changed. It was subtle, like the shift in the air before a storm. I noticed him glancing at me a little longer than necessary, his eyes lingering on my face as if searching for something he remembered from years ago. And suddenly, I felt the old connection between us, the unspoken bond we had always shared. I wasn't sure if I should be flattered or cautious. "Remember that time we got lost after that college party?" he asked, breaking the silence. I laughed, recalling the night clearly. How could I forget? We ended up walking in circles for hours trying to find our way back to campus. We were such a mess. "And you kept telling me you knew exactly where we were," he added, grinning. "I believed you, even though I knew you had no idea. You always seemed so confident." His words hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't just the memory. It was the way he looked at me, like he could still see the person I was back then, before life had a chance to weigh me down. There was something so pure in that, something that made me want to hold on to this moment. But then reality sank back in. I was married, and William was just a friend from my past. So why did my heart race every time he smiled? Why did I suddenly feel like a teenager with a crush? We walked along the trail together, sharing stories and laughing like no time had passed. I felt free in a way I hadn't in years, and that freedom was intoxicating. With William, I didn't have to be the responsible wife or the diligent professional. I could just be Jessica, the girl who got lost in the woods, who laughed at silly jokes and who believed in magic. We reached the lake, and for a moment we just stood there, taking in the beauty of the water shimmering in the late afternoon sun. It felt like we were the only two people in the world, as if time had paused just for us. "So, are you happy, Jessica?" he asked quietly, his gaze fixed on the water. The question caught me off guard. "Of course I'm happy," I replied, a little too quickly. "I mean, life is good. I have everything I ever wanted. A stable job, a loving husband." He nodded, but I could tell he wasn't convinced. Sometimes we think we have everything we want, but deep down we're still searching for something. Something that makes us feel alive. His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. I knew he was right. There was a part of me that longed for something more, something beyond the routine of daily life. But admitting that felt like a betrayal of everything I had worked for. I tried to laugh it off. "You always did have a way of reading people." "Only you," he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. In that moment, I felt a spark between us. Something old and familiar, yet dangerously close to crossing a line I wasn't sure I wanted to cross. I knew I should walk away, say goodbye, and leave this moment in the past. But a part of me wanted to stay, to see where this connection might lead. Before I knew it, we were standing closer, our shoulders brushing and his hand lightly grazing mine. It was the smallest touch, but it set my heart racing. I looked up at him, searching his face for some sign of what he was feeling. "Jessica," he murmured, his gaze locking onto mine. I should have pulled away. I knew that. I was married, and the right thing would have been to step back and end whatever was happening here before it could go any further. But in that moment, with William standing so close, his eyes holding a mix of warmth and curiosity, it was like I was pulled by an invisible force. I felt as if I was seeing him not just as an old friend, but as someone who understood me in a way few people ever did. He cleared his throat, looking a bit uncertain himself. "Jessica, I know this is unexpected, and maybe it's just the nostalgia talking, but I feel like we left something unfinished back in college." His words stopped me cold. I had always wondered, even back then, if there was more between us, a possibility left unexplored. But life had moved on, and we'd both taken different paths. "William, we can't go back to what we were," I said quietly, trying to sound more resolute than I felt. He nodded, and there was a hint of sadness in his smile. "I know, and I'm not asking you to, but sometimes moments like this make me wonder if there's a reason we ran into each other today. Here of all places." I looked down, focusing on a leaf on the ground as if it held all the answers. Part of me wanted to say goodbye, to leave this memory untouched by temptation. But another part of me, the part that longed for adventure and escape, wanted to stay a little longer. After all, what was the harm in simply talking? "William, I'm happy to see you. I really am. But my life it's not simple. I'm married, and I don't want to make things complicated." He reached for my hand, his fingers brushing mine ever so gently. "I respect that, Jessica. I don't want to complicate anything either. Just know that if you ever need someone to talk to, someone who remembers who you were before life got so serious, I'm here." The sincerity in his words made my heart ache. I hadn't realized how much I missed this part of myself, the carefree, adventurous side I'd left behind when I settled into the routines of adult life. With William, I felt like I was allowed to be that person again, if only for a few moments. We continued to walk around the lake in comfortable silence, neither of us needing to say much. As we made our way back down the trail, he told me about his own life, his career, and the ups and downs he'd faced since college. Listening to him reminded me of the dreams I once had, the things I'd put aside as I focused on building a stable, predictable future. Before I knew it, we were back at the start of the trail, standing by the spot where we'd first met that afternoon. The sun was beginning to set, casting a warm, golden glow over the trees. The world felt quiet, as if it was holding its breath, waiting to see what we would do next. "Jessica," he said, breaking the silence. "This has been one of the best afternoons I've had in a long time. Thank you for spending it with me." I smiled, feeling a strange mix of emotions. "Me too, William. I didn't realize how much I missed. Just being here, talking to you." He took a step closer, his eyes searching mine as if looking for some hidden answer. "I don't want to make things difficult for you, Jessica. But if you ever need a friend, someone who gets it, who understands what you're going through, I'm here." I nodded, feeling a swell of gratitude for his kindness. "Thank you, William. I'll remember that." He smiled, a soft, almost wistful expression crossing his face. "Take care of yourself, Jessica. Don't let life pull you too far from who you really are." With that, he turned and began walking down the trail, his figure fading into the dimming light of the evening. I stood there, watching him go, a mixture of relief and sadness settling over me. Part of me wanted to call out to him, to ask him to stay just a little longer. But another part of me knew that this was how it had to end. As I walked back to my car, I thought about what he had said, that sometimes we lose parts of ourselves in the rush of life. Parts we may not even realize are gone until someone else reminds us. William had done that for me today. He had reminded me of the dreams I'd set aside, the person I used to be, and the joy of living in the moment. When I got back home, Mark was waiting for me, as he always did. He asked about my walk, and I told him it was lovely, peaceful. I didn't mention William, and I wasn't sure I ever would. But something had shifted within me that afternoon in the woods, a quiet realization that maybe I needed to make more room in my life for the things that made me feel alive. As I lay in bed that night, my mind drifted back to the woods, to William's warm smile and gentle words. I knew that whatever we'd shared that day was more than a simple reunion. It was a reminder to find a balance between responsibility and adventure, between love and independence. I wasn't sure what the future held, but I knew one thing. The next time I found myself walking through the woods, I wouldn't be searching for anything or anyone. I'd just be there, present, ready to embrace whatever life brought my way. And if I ever did run into William again, I'd be ready to thank him for helping me find that missing piece of myself.